Hello and welcome to the latest installment of our Manage Engine Insights video podcast. Today's topic is on building resilience with cloud transformation. I'm Priyanka Roy, an enterprise evangelist at Manage Engine, and I'll be your co host for this video podcast. Today, we are going to explore the growing rate of cloud adoption and the factors leading to this growth. As COVID 19 ushered in an era of remote work, organizations rushed to adopt cloud based solutions to ensure business continuity. From collaboration and productivity tools to asset management and IT security solutions, the cloud had it all. Experts believe that this accelerated adoption will lead to a sustained cloud first approach in organizations across the globe. In a world where unprecedented situations can present themselves at any time, the cloud offers organizations much needed flexibility, scalability, and resilience. To provide insights into the various benefits that the cloud brings to the table, I am extremely pleased to be joined by Bernard Golden, CEO of Navica. Bernard consults with early stage companies and enterprises in the areas of cloud computing, cloud native technologies, and technology adoption strategies. Before starting his consulting practice with Navica, he served as vice president of cloud strategy for Capital One. In this role, he helped guide Capital One's cloud and technology strategy with a particular emphasis on cloud native advanced practices and how they can enable innovation based on cloud computing. Bernard will take us through the dynamics of the cloud market, how organizations can optimize their cloud investments, and the potential challenges they can expect on their journey of cloud adoption. Hello, Bernard. It's great to have you here with us today.
Hi, Priyanka. Well, and thank you so much for inviting me to come and participate in your podcast. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Bernard. It's a pleasure to have you here with us. So let's jump right in.
Okay.
Let us begin by understanding the sudden surge in cloud adoption. Many organizations have expedited their IT modernization plans due to the pandemic, and the cloud has been the centerpiece of these plans. So, what would you say are the top factors behind this accelerated adoption of cloud solutions?
Yeah, I would say there's probably several um, in terms of what's been driving enterprises to move so rapidly and so forth. I mean, the cliche that you hear quite frequently is the arrival of this terrible pandemic has accelerated digital transformation by a decade. Months have caused what would ordinarily take years to occur. And that's when you're in an emergency situation, you take emergency measures. And so I think that's understandable. Sort of the factors or kind of what are the underlying drivers. I think the first one is something that you and I are experiencing right at this very moment, which is the need to move employees away from coming into the office, coming into situations, environments where the virus can spread more easily, being on public transport, possibly, and dispersing them out to their own homes to work from, the whole work from home. So clearly, one aspect of that is um, all of the kinds of technologies, the applications, and so forth that all of these employees engage with are no longer accessed via a centralized point. So you've got to make them available where they are. And so that's had a huge driver in just terms of adopting applications that are cloud based that can be accessed from anywhere. you know the we're experiencing one at this very moment, which is we're working on excuse me, we're being recorded via Zoom. And Zoom has just had an unbelievable take up during the during this period. So that's one driver, just the fact that we now have dispersed um, employees. And I guess the same would be true of customers and so forth. There's a massive work from home, and you have to be able to serve those individuals from where they are. I'd say the second thing is sort of ties to that employee kind of, or I should say customer kind of thing, which is um, you need applications that can operate and be accessed from anywhere. And there was already this sort of digital transformation, the changing and increasing preference of consumers to engage digitally. I don't want to have a sales rep come and talk to me, come and meet with me. I just want to find out about your product and order it maybe online. And that's been an ongoing underlying trend. And this is accelerated because you can't have a sales rep go talk to somebody, and you can't have and so forth. So there's been a kind of a trend toward how do we take our existing applications, which have probably been primarily physical, somewhat digital, and shift that proportion, make it more digital. And so that's been a driver for companies. And those kinds of digital applications tend to be cloud-based, just by their very nature. And I guess the third thing is sort of reflective of what I just mentioned about Zoom, which is the scale of all of all these digital applications. The take up is just skyrocketed. So if you're a typical company, and I'm located here in the United States, so we have a very large retailer called Target, and Target is a kind of a you can just about outfit an entire home and everything you need in it from a Target store. Well, again, guess what? People don't want to go to retail places, and in fact, in many environments, there's restrictions on that. So they've had to shift to taking much more of their order traffic online, and then set up systems that people can just basically drive up to a curb, load their stuff up from a curb, and drive off. And so they've had to create all these cloud-based applications. And so those three things taken together have all led to this kind of a decade's worth of transformation, a decade's worth of adoption, a decade's worth of a shift to the cloud, all occurring in the matter of months.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that with us. So moving on, as we just discussed, innumerable organizations have turned to the cloud to fuel their remote work operations. So how do cloud solutions help businesses build agility in their processes?
Well, I guess there's the obvious ways, and then there's the not so obvious ways. So, the obvious ways are, if it's cloud-based, and again, going back to there's no physical location, right? You can't say, I'm going to serve up these applications from inside the corporate network, and there's going to be somebody who's on a laptop or a desktop sitting at this desk, and I can count on that, because the person might be working from home. And, depending on the person and their circumstances, they might be going even somewhere else. There's been a tremendous shift out of, say, San Francisco to more suburban locations, because people have wanted to move away from dense environments to less dense environments. Well, you couldn't have even said, well, I'm just going to, instead of that person sitting at this desk, they're going to be sitting at this desk at this house located at XYZ address, because you don't know that. So you have to have agility in terms of the flexibility of being able to do that. And I think we'll see that ongoing. I guess the other thing about cloud and agility is a more fundamental or a more foundational kind of characteristic, which is cloud enables but also forces different kinds of application architectures and different kinds of operation practices that tend to be associated with agile techniques. You might have agile development, you might have DevOps. And let me dive into that a little bit, because this is important. Again, so going back to what I said in response to your first question, you have much more erratic nature. There's a much higher erratic nature of demand, meaning, you might have 10x the changes in volume of user base or load on your applications. And so you need applications that can basically scale up and down with that. That's traditionally been very difficult to deal with in terms of corporate infrastructure environments. Here's our data center. You have this many. You have one rack of servers, and if you need more than one rack of servers, it's going to take 6 months to get more stuff. With cloud, it's basically, I just need some more. Let me request some more resources. Let the cloud provider figure out how to deliver that. So these changing consumption patterns, these changing load patterns, demand that you use the infrastructure of cloud, because it's much more flexible, much more capable of supporting erratic loads. That's sort of the first thing. And then the second thing is basically you have to change your application architectures and your operations practices to take advantage of that. And that's been a driver for adopting cloud native techniques. And part of that is architecture, so that your application can flexibly add and subtract resources depending on load. Traditional applications have been very static and very monolithic. And so it was, if I need to um, increase the number of servers devoted to this application, I've got to go through a very long planning process, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It might be a couple of 3 months. It might be longer than that. With cloud, it now takes 10 minutes to get more resources. So now you have to say, how do I design my application that I can easily add resources in 10 minutes? How do I have operations processes and practices that can, you know, um, configure my application to see those new resources in the course of 10 minutes? And then just as likely, oh, the loads dropped off. How do I configure, operate my application so that I can remove those kinds of processes? So the foundational capabilities of taking advantage of the agile infrastructure, and then the overlay of architectures and operations practices that sort of also are associated with cloud agility and cloud native practices. The two of those things combined sort of are the driving cloud adoption and driving the agile practices associated with cloud computing.
Thank you, Bernard. That makes a lot of sense. So, moving on to the next question, I believe maintaining data integrity is one of the biggest concerns for many organizations when it comes to cloud adoption. And as we know, data privacy concerns have also been on the rise across the world lately. And I believe in response to that, many countries have come up with their own set of strict data localization laws. So, given the distributed nature of the public cloud, do you see data localization rules posing a challenge for organizations planning to adopt a cloud first approach?
Well, for sure it can. And, one thing is, if you're a company located in operating in a particular country, let's just choose one, not at random, but Indonesia. There might be Indonesian rules associated with data relating to Indonesian citizens or business conditions or whatever that would require you to keep your data there and within the national boundaries of Indonesia. And so you might need if you're a company that's operating there that has to follow all those rules and regulations and wants to be in conformance, you sort of say, well, how do I do that within the context of, keeping, complying with all those laws? You need to find a provider who stores data there, has a data location there. And that can be a challenge if, for example, you're looking at AWS. I don't believe they have an Indonesian location. You might need to find an Indonesian company. There's cloud company. Another approach might be to say, well, I'm still going to use a global cloud provider, but architect and operate my application such that the application operates here, but it reaches back into Indonesia to operate on that data. That might or might not be in conformance with the regulations. So you have to be thoughtful about that and make sure that you continue to do that. And I guess a third approach might be, if you're an Asian company, you say, I'm going to find a way to implement that kind of cloud capability and agility within my own, within my own environment. And so you might take a crack at that so-called private cloud. That's, in my experience, that's one that I don't necessarily recommend, and certainly not as a first step, because it can be quite challenging from a technical perspective. So, it's one of those, it's one of those things that sounds easy, and then you get into it, it can be challenging. And then finally, and this is certainly not the case throughout the world, the big hyperscale providers here in the US, the ones that I refer to them as AMG, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, but there are, a couple of others that are not AMG. So Alibaba, for example, I think it's Alibaba. I may have that name wrong, but a Chinese-based firm. They are implementing more and more regions all the time. And so if you're in one of those countries, you might find that one of those global providers puts in a capability within your own country, and you can rely on that. I'll just use an example. When cloud computing first got going, it seemed, Korea seemed like a place that's quite advanced technically, but there was no local capability for any of the big providers. So that was a real challenge for Korean companies that said, we want to embrace this capability. Well, eventually, Amazon came and set up a Korean region. So now you can operate with all the capabilities of Amazon AWS within the Korean national boundaries. So there's a variety of ways or strategies to pursue a cloud capability and still comply with data compliance, data privacy, and so forth. You just have to be thoughtful about it and understand, kind of the trajectory of what's going on in your country, and be realistic about your own technical capabilities. Most companies will find they're better technology users than they are technology providers.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing those insights with us, Bernard. So, like you said earlier, building a private cloud comes with its own set of challenges. So, on that note, can you tell us how a hybrid cloud strategy takes data security, privacy, and compliance concerns into account? And when should organizations opt for a hybrid cloud? Like, when do they know that we should opt for a hybrid cloud as opposed to a private cloud or a public cloud, or yeah.
Well, hybrid cloud and hybrid computing is a term that what's the phrase? It's quite ambiguous, and it depends on depends on the person using it, what they might mean. It's kind of like somebody says, "I have a pet," and you never know. Does that mean you have a pet cat, or do you have a pet snake, or do you have a pet whatever? And hybrid is similar to that. One strategy with that is, I have a lot of existing applications that are built under those old assumptions that I outlined a bit earlier in this podcast. Trying to convert all of those is really hard and requires a big investment in re-architecting and and so forth. So one hybrid cloud strategy is, I'm just going to leave that the way it is. My new digital type applications, I'm going to deploy into a public cloud environment of whoever is the right public cloud provider for me based on functionality, data privacy, so forth and so on. And I'm going to operate them as sort of two separate things. And then a slightly more sophisticated approach to that is, well, I'm going to do that, but there's still lots of important data within my applications associated with my on-site applications. I'm going to design a way to basically punch back from my cloud-based applications to get at that transactional data or that whatever data it is. And the big cloud providers have capabilities that support that and enable that. And so you might create an API layer around those applications, those on-prem applications. That's another variant of hybrid. A third variant is I'm going to put in some kind of agile overlay on top of my on-premise, and that might mean something like I'm going to install a Kubernetes kind of cluster or something like that, or even go all the way and say I'm going to build my own cloud. And of course, a sort of a slight variant of that is the big cloud providers are now offering basically on-prem versions of their public cloud offerings. So Azure Stack, AWS Outpost, Google Anthos, all of those things, all of those offerings are products that you can deploy into your own computing environment that provide the capabilities of the provider's cloud offering. And by the way, they're also designed and tuned and can be configured to support that, what I call punchback or whatever. In other words, a sort of a hybrid deployment kind of thing. So there's as I said, hybrid can be interpreted a lot of different ways, and you should be thoughtful about that. And what I always talk to about with companies is, you know, don't bite off more than you can chew. I guess that's the right phrase. In other words, don't go, oh, well, hey, there's all this really cool technology. Why don't we step up and do it? Because it can end up being a very large investment. And so you might take a more measured approach to it and say, given what I want to accomplish, and you sort of have to define that, what is a incremental way to get to that? Or what's the least investment I can make? What's the least disruptive investment I can make to accomplish what I need to do to basically support a hybrid kind of computing environment? That's how I always encourage companies to think about it. So that's I guess it can be a little frustrating for companies to say, I want hybrid, and how do I do that? And the answer comes back, well, it depends. So it's a sort of an assessment and planning kind of process.
Thank you. So it's more of a step-by-step approach that works the best for companies, as I can understand. But since we are discussing hybrid cloud, and we were discussing data integrity, data management earlier, many businesses function with highly sensitive amounts of data, but they might not necessarily have the resources to manage and monitor their own infrastructure. So in this case, is it wise to integrate a co-location strategy into an organization's hybrid cloud?
Well, it's interesting you ask that question and bring it forward, because I believe Colo has a very strong it's a very strong option, or it's a very it's something that companies should consider. and in part, it's because running infrastructure well is becoming more and more complex. And so that sort of tends to say we should find a specialist. And for many companies, hiring in that talent is challenging, tends to be expensive. But also, most companies, that's not their primary focus. That's not what they really want to be. They want to be a retailer, or they want to be a hotel chain, or they want to be an automobile, distributorships, or they want to be a chemical wholesaler, whatever it might be. That's their focus. That's why their customers come to them. And so I often talk to companies and sort of say, figure out what differentiates you, what makes you distinctive in the marketplace, what your customers look to you for. And given that the increasing preference of consumers and customers for digital capabilities, focus your attention there. Don't focus your attention on kind of the underlying undifferentiated capability. And I sort of put it in this kind of way. We have a retail chain here in the United States, and it's located in other countries as well. You might be familiar with it, called Nordstrom. And Nordstrom is very famous for its public, for its customer service. They know your name, they take care of you, you can get a personal shopper. It's extremely well known for that. And what I say, and they deal with it, your personal shopper, can call you and say, oh, we just got this new thing in that's just perfect for you. I've set it aside, whatever it might be. Why don't you come in? It's white glove customer service. One of the ways they do that is via email. Hey, Bernard, we just got this great blazer in, and I think it would be really good for your, and whatever. That's great customer service. But I never think, wow, I shop at Nordstrom because they have a great email server. Their email infrastructure is no. I mean, it's just like, okay, what I'm focused on is the customer service, and that's what they're focused on. So if you're a company like that, you say, what makes me distinctive? What makes me distinctive is the talent of my people and the products that we bring in. That's where you should focus your attention, and not focus on kind of undifferentiated infrastructure. From a colo perspective, that means companies should think, is running a data center really a core capability that I, should focus my precious talent and capital on, or should I look to some external provider who really does that? And, to the greatest possible extent, focus my expensive tech talent on those things that differentiate me, applications that help me with my customer service, or applications that enable companies to track their orders, or customers to track their orders, whatever it might be. Focus in the areas that make you distinctive. And colo, I think, is going to be a very powerful, because companies are increasingly, as the computing infrastructure, the data centers become more complex, more expensive, are going to increasingly say that's not a place where we want to do a capital allocation. So colo, I think, is a really good option, and one that I expect to see grow a lot.
That's some amazing advice. Thank you, Bernard. So, moving on, can you shed some light on the major challenges and risks that can jeopardize the success of a cloud strategy? And how can organizations prepare themselves to tackle these risks?
Yeah. Well, um, boy, there's a lot to that question, and a lot to that topic. I mean, I guess probably the first thing I say to companies is, think of cloud computing as a new generation or a next generation of computing capability, of computing functionality. Don't think of your cloud provider as a data center at the end of a wire, and continue to use the same assumptions about infrastructure, deployment, and configuration, and operations, and so forth. It's, the what cloud computing offers as a foundation is, it substitutes virtual computing capability for physical computing capability.
Right.
And it offers automated or API driven interaction rather than physical interaction, manual interaction. So the combination of substituting virtual and automation for physical and manual means that all of the operating assumptions about how your computing environment are changed. And I mentioned that in terms of things like, you know, um, designing application architectures so they can gracefully grow and shrink depending on load. So the first thing is sort of go, okay, understand the difference between what is now available versus what was, and don't sort of think, I've got this mental model of what was, so I'm going to treat this cloud environment as a data center at the end of a wire. Really study that and internalize it and so forth. Um, the second thing I would say is, and I'm sort of quoting, I think this is Picasso, but I've heard this, many times, which is um, mediocre artists copy, great artists steal. And so there are companies that have been very successful in taking advantage of cloud computing. Obviously, there's the what so-called cloud native companies like a Netflix or a Uber, or many other companies, and I'm sure every country now has those examples. Um, and there are traditional enterprises that have actually made that shift. Um, Capital One, where I worked previously to what I'm doing now, um, is an example of that. They embraced cloud computing, and mid this year, a few months ago, they had completely shut down their data centers and moved every application into a cloud environment. Well, rather than you figuring out how to do it, why not look to them and say, how did you do it? And just steal all their great ideas. Let their, I sometimes use this phrase, or I've heard this, let their hindsight be your foresight. So just find out what they did and say, okay, how can I apply that to my environment? The next thing I would say is, okay, that's a great input. Who? Look at the who. So you sort of learned what, which is, kind of what cloud computing is. You've learned how, which is you've stolen all these great ideas. You have to think about who's going to do that. And for most companies, it's going to be your existing staff. It's not going to be, well, we're just going to go out and, double our staff size. and I think that's the right approach. Many companies sort of go, well, I've got these people with all these old skills. I need new whiz bangy new skills, so I'm going to go get new people. And that really overlooks the tremendous um, domain knowledge that your existing employees have. They know all the ins and outs of your business. They're probably experts in your particular business. If you're a chemical distributor, the people who are on your staff understand that business very well. If you hire in somebody from the outside, they may know a lot about how to configure a cloud-based application, but they're going to be starting from scratch, probably, in your domain. So, and I think, and this happened before I got to Capital One, so I'm not trying to claim credit for anything like that, but they took a very, I think, a really admirable approach. They set up an entire kind of internal university to train up all of their people in these cloud things, because they said, all of our stuff is going to be in cloud. Everybody, that's going to be a foundational knowledge. They set up an entire thing. They supported people taking training classes. They gave different kinds of access. They really thoughtfully said, we're going to bring our employees along on this, and we're going to invest in them because they're great bankers, and we're going to make them great cloud bankers. And so I think that's a model for how to do it. So that's the kind of way I would think that I would recommend that companies do that. And then, of course, as I said, you have to do the hard work, and I don't want to make it sound trivial, of saying, okay, I've got an existing application estate plus all these new applications I'm going to be building. What's my architectural strategy? How do I go about that? What do I do with these existing applications? You might do a so-called lift and shift to just get them into an environment. But you might be also thinking, eventually I'm going to have to modify them, update them, rewrite them. And, that's probably a multi-year process. And, you sort of have to think about that too. And, what's prioritize the application, the process of that, which ones are going to go, figure that out. And, it's one of those things that is sounds simple, but it's not easy. And so you have to plan for that.
Okay, so those were some amazing tips. Thank you, Bernard. Lastly, we know that software as a service, infrastructure as a service, and platform as a service take up a majority of the cloud services that we see in the market today. But there are many other services that have been steadily gaining popularity as well. So, which as a service models do you see becoming crucial in the next few years?
Well, I would approach it this way. That sort of so-called IPS, infrastructure platform software service, excuse me, was promulgated pretty early in the availability of cloud computing, sort of 2008, 2007, 2008. And it was popularized, I think, maybe by Gartner, and then was embodied in what is still an excellent cloud computing definition that came out from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which is a US government agency. And you could still find the so-called NIST definition of cloud computing available, and it's well worthwhile. And I refer to it pretty still today. I will say that the IPS model presumed a kind of a very layer cake kind of a thing. There'd be this layer, and it'd be maybe from these providers, and this layer would come from another set of providers, and so forth. I'll say that software as a service has exploded and can still be accessed individually. I'm going to find an accounting SaaS system, or I'm going to find a inventory tracking SaaS system. But in terms of the sort of the cloud providers, they've really sort of, there really isn't the clear distinction in those three layers or those three offerings or those, three different kinds of providers anymore. If you look at a provider like AWS, they definitely provide infrastructure as a service. You can get virtual machines, you can get storage and so forth. So they tick that box. But they have platforms as a service kinds of capabilities as well. They offer a managed Kubernetes and so forth. They have individual sort of utility kinds of capabilities, like a notification service or an API gateway that is sort of kind of looks and would fall into that platform service. And then they also offer software as a service kinds of things. They have Amazon Connect, which is kind of a call center in a box, so to speak. It's a call center capabilities, which sounds and looks a lot like software as a service. It's an application functionality level. So it's really the distinction between those three types has been very smeared. And I wouldn't necessarily use it as a guidepost as to selecting a provider or anything like that. In fact, I might sort of advise the flip side, which is look for a provider who can, address what you require across all layers of that stack.
Yeah.
With the exception of the software service, because there are many verticals, many various point solutions that are still offered as software as a service that you might very well go to a separate provider for. But so that I don't know if that really clarifies it or just says it's a bit of murkier kind of thing. Really, I think maybe another way to think about it is, I outlined that kind of combination of manual to virtual, and physical to virtual, manual to automated. And what the cloud providers have done have continued to take that logic and say, what other things can we provide on a virtual basis that is automated access? And they've done it like API gateways and so forth. They're just steadily building up, and they're enabling companies to sort of move further up the stack. I'm talking about user companies, and say, what are the things that we need to build that make us distinctive, and that we don't require, that we don't have to do, we can offload heavy lifting. Excuse me. So I use the example of Nordstrom and the email, right? So in fact, all of the providers, all the big cloud providers offer an email service. So you can just, outsource your email to them. And that enables a company like Nordstrom to say, possibly, how can we build an application that really captures and further enables our unique customer service, and whatever that might be. They might build a mobile application that provides notifications to you, so or something, whatever it might be. This sort of increasing capability that the cloud providers have taken on, extending the logic of physical to virtual and manual to automated, is moving further up the stack and enabling companies to offload more and more of the kind of plumbing, so to speak, and focus more on the distinctive application functionality.
Amazing. So thank you, Bernard, for sharing these wonderful insights with our audience. In this unprecedented time that businesses find themselves in, the cloud certainly can make a lot of positive difference, as we just discussed. So thank you for joining us today and sharing your expertise with us.
Well, Priyanka, thank you so much again for inviting me. I've really enjoyed it. I apologize for being a little bit hoarse, I guess, but it's been fantastic, and I hope that your listeners enjoy it. And it's been a great experience. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. If you have any feedback or questions, please leave them in the comments section, and we'll get back to you at the earliest. Stay tuned for our next installment.